Hi everyone. In this video, we will analyze a hypothesis test and make conclusions. A social scientist believes that the average number of community service hours completed by high school graduates is no more than 50 hours. You wish to test his claim. The z-statistic is calculated as 2.47. Assume the significance level is alpha equals 0.025. What is the p-value and conclusion for this hypothesis test? The first thing we need to do for a hypothesis test is identify the hypotheses. So we're going to look for the null and the alternative hypotheses. Reading back through the question, we see that the scientist believes that the average number of community service hours, since we're dealing with average, this means that we have a mu, which represents average, and we have the phrase is no more than 50 hours. This phrase no more than means that it is the very top amount. We can't go beyond that. So it's going to be less than or even equal to 50 hours. This gives us our null hypothesis because less than or equal to, because it has an equal sign attached, means it's a null hypothesis. A null hypothesis must have equals, and it can be in conjunction with a less than or a greater than, but if it has an equal sign, it must be a null hypothesis, which means that the alternative hypothesis has a less than or greater than or a not equal to sign. And this is no more than 50 hours, so we can finish up the null hypothesis. And the alternative hypothesis is going to be the opposite of that, so this is going to be greater than 50 hours. If you're reading in your question and you see the word increased or decreased, then we're going to be an increased is greater than and a decreased will be less than. And those will be in your alternative hypothesis. So if it is decreased, we have less than. If you have increased, it's greater than. In our case, we just have the phrase is no more than, and so we have our inequality in conjunction with the equal sign. Now that we have our hypotheses, let's go find the rest of the information that was given to us. We have a z-statistic that was given as 2.47. So let's go ahead and write our z-statistic. And the z-statistic is also considered our test statistic. And the last thing that was given to us is that we have a significance level of alpha equaling 0.025. We were asked to find the p-value, so let's put this here, and the conclusion for the test. Now that we have everything organized, let's go look at our hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis says that mu is greater than 50. A greater than sign will go to larger numbers, and it also points in the direction of the tail of the test that we're working with. It's pointing to the right, so this is a right-tailed test, and the right numbers are the larger of the numbers, so that works as well. So you can think of it as being the larger numbers that are greater, and it's pointing to the right. We have a wonderful tool here that will help us calculate the p-value without doing a lot of stuff in our calculator. So we're going to take advantage of that using this tool from Desmos. And we need to go find the right-tailed test. So we're going to move our dot down to the right side, making sure that we have everything on the right. Then we're going to go to our significance level, which alpha is 0.025. And then the last thing we need to do is move our test statistic to 2.47, and it gets kind of tricky. Make sure we get it there, 0.2. There we go. So now we have our p-value associated with our test statistic, and we also have our test statistic and z-value, our critical value down below. So now we have our p-value. We can just write it over here that it is 0.0068, and we can compare this with alpha, 0.0068, and our significance level of 0.025. our p-value and our alpha, or significance level, the alpha is actually larger than the p-value. When this occurs, we reject the null hypothesis. Another way we could have identified whether we reject or fail to reject is looking at the test statistic and the critical value. Seeing that the test statistic passed our cutoff for the critical value, and it ends up inside the rejection zone or rejection region, it is no longer in the fail to reject because it crossed this tolerance that we have right here, and so we reject that null hypothesis. So we have two ways that we can answer it. We compare our p and alpha. If p is less than alpha, then we reject the null hypothesis. And we saw over here that the test statistic was greater than the critical value. Again, another way to show that it went into the rejection region, so we rejected the null hypothesis. We have two ways, but either way we chose, we have the conclusion that we reject the null hypothesis, which is that the average number of community service hours completed by high school graduates is no more than 50 hours, and we have sufficient evidence to suggest that the average is actually greater than 50 hours. And we're all done.